I'd like to call our work session back to order. So we have, we're going to talk about under academic affairs, the tribunal and alternative education process, kind of get a review and update. You know, we mentioned earlier about one of the major things that we worked on this year, and that was to begin to look at alternative education in the big picture. As a board, we've talked about our tribunal process. We know moving forward throughout the summer and throughout the year, we're going to be touching on other aspects of alternative education, looking at discipline data and other things based upon the breakdown that the board has talked about and that we've discussed with Dr. Boone, and she and her staff will prepare for us as appropriate. But before we get into that, there was something earlier that I meant to mention. You know, as we were talking about board norms and communication with the public, it seems more and more we are also dealing with rumor control and being rumor central. And so one of the rumors I meant to bring up earlier that I've been hearing out in the community has to deal with some principal hires that the superintendent recommended and the board approved, and there's a principal out there with the last name Doyle. What's his first name? Patrick Doyle. And so I got all these phone calls, and some of you may have gotten phone calls. I'm sure Ms. Doyle, you gotten phone calls where people think that the Patrick Doyle who's a principal is also the Patrick Doyle who is related to you. Would you like to offer any rumor clarification with that?
Yes, so the Patrick Doyle, who is now with Norview Middle, is not my son. I do have a son named Patrick Doyle. He lives in Northern Virginia, works for Nestle Waters, and is unrelated to the district. So I am not the mother, the aunt, the sister of anybody named Patrick Doyle, who's the principal in Norfolk Public Schools. So I think it's an opportunity for us to provide that clarification, because I think that rumor is still out there. And so it's an opportunity for us on record to clarify that. And I think it's important to do so because as a board, you know, we are held to certain standards, and we are not allowed to vote on and have folks within the division.
That's right.
So I would have recused myself should it be necessary, or done whatever I needed to do, not to get in his way or get out of the way. So, and that would apply to any one of us. So I think, you know, thank you, Mr. Jordan, for giving me the opportunity. But really, it's just an education for people to know that many of us have the same last names. And in fact, I'll share with you, there is another Courtney Doyle in the division.
That's right.
That's right.
With whom I share many emails. So, you know, names are very similar in this day and age, and we just can't assume that everyone's related to one another. So I am not related to anyone in the division, despite having very similar last name or first names to somebody.
And if I may, Chief Larry Boone and I always have to do that clarification too. We're both Boones, but no relation, so.
And it's also a good point because it goes back to our code of ethics. You know, people may not realize it, but if we had a immediate relative, and maybe even Attorney Cloud may want to chime in, you know, immediate relatives of ours, if we had somebody who wanted to apply to the division, they can't get hired. I think Reverend Haywood has talked about that before, and actually I was going to bring a question forward in the future because I was speaking to my older daughter who's studying to be a math teacher, and I think through her school they were talking about they may want her to do student teaching here at North Public Schools, and I said to her, I don't know if you can do that. Yeah. And so you know, so it's just something that the average citizen may not be aware of, but we know that's that protocol, and you're absolutely correct. I still have relatives in the division, and if they're promotions or demotions or raises or whatever came up, you know, we would remember to declare it and recuse ourselves accordingly. So just wanted to clear that rumor up, and there may be some other things, and again, as part of our board communication, I think it's important for us to, when we hear things like that, to be able to clear it up, because if we don't, it can damage the integrity and the credibility of the board and the division as a whole. So,
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. With that, Dr. Boone, we'll turn things over to you for academic affairs.
And as we've done a priority of reports and information and that we want to review as a governance team to advance the work of the district, we committed to a review of our tribunal process, as well as to provide for the board an update on where we are with recommendations that came from the alternative education program review. Because of budget limitations and also our capacity to take on so many other things, we talked about doing the alternative ed updates or implementation would be around those things that didn't have significant budgetary commitments, such as professional development, looking at the transition process to and from alternative settings. We, of course, had the in-school suspension piece there, and we won't see that happen this year as we had hoped. But, so this update today is to share what we've done to review our tribunal process and where we are with some of the recommendations on alternative ed. And Dr. Rogers is going to kick it off, and then I think Dr. Harold Lands and Mr. Coleman is in the wing also. So good afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Boone. Chairman Jordan, school board members, this afternoon, as Dr. Boone shared, we will be providing you with an update on the tribunal process and the alternative education date. As has been in past presentations, we will provide you with a brief overview, a background information, and a high-level summary of what's been done to date with the tribunal process as well as with the alternative education update. I'd like to say publicly that John Coleman has done a fantastic job with that work and leading the group on some of the follow-up work. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Dr. Harold Lands to come first to provide you with the update for the tribunal process, followed by Mr. Coleman. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Good afternoon, Mr. Jordan, Dr. Gabriel, members of the board, Dr. Boone. As Dr. Rogers and Dr. Boone mentioned, I'll be sharing information about the tribunal process first and give you a little detail about it, some of the background information, and to answer any questions that you might have. You may recall that the tribunal process, as we call it, the panel that we have dealing with student disciplinary hearings held at Rosemont currently is something that has been in place, a process that has been in place for us since the 2013-14 school year. And we hold the discipline tribunals so that we're making sure that we provide students with the appropriate due process requirements, as well as making sure that we provide support for students throughout the district and throughout these disciplinary hearings. I will share some background information with you first, just to remind you of the short-term suspensions, which we do not deal with short-term suspensions in the tribunal process, but just to provide some clarity for you, we do deal with long-term suspensions, which are suspensions that are 11 to 364 days, and those are all the suspensions that schools might bring to the tribunal hearing to deal with a variety of disciplinary matters. The purpose of the tribunal, as our district uses it, is to make sure that we have an opportunity for an impartial panel to hear various discipline infractions, to learn the details about those, to have an opportunity where staff members from the school that provided the infraction for the student, as well as an opportunity for the students and parents and guardians to actually come and present to this particular impartial panel. And I'll share a little bit more for you about the process as we proceed. The due process piece, as you know, is very important. It's to make sure that students' rights are protected and to make sure that there are no concerns in terms of violations of laws, make sure that the students' rights are protected, and to make sure that we have an opportunity to share with students and families that we are truly concerned about their success in the district and want to make sure that we're being supportive of them. And we often remind people about the fact that the tribunal panels, those particular hearings, are a student process. So sometimes there are conversations about the fact that things related to staff with that, and I know we've had those concerns, but it specifically was put in place to have the impartial hearings related to a student's due process rights. In the past, many school districts, including Norfolk Public Schools, we've addressed issues of disproportionality. For years, many school districts across the country have dealt with issues dealing with disproportionality, particularly of African-American students, African-American males, as well as, in many cases, African-American females. And our school district has, for many years, been reviewing that information, as well as making sure that we have practices in place to try to support all students. For many years, or for the last several years, you're aware that our district has been involved with the Office for Civil Rights. Several years ago, there was a case that we dealt with that involved disproportionality matters, and I bring that up because it was part of all of the discussions that we had as a district related to how we might proceed in terms of particular hearings. The Office for Civil Rights, we signed there was a resolution agreement that involved a number of different responsibilities and requirements that we would handle as a district, and reviewing the particular disciplinary practices was part of that, as well as a thorough review by the Office for Civil Rights of our student handbook and other from different policies, procedures, all sorts of things related to student discipline. But I thought it was important to mention that information as we talk further about the tribunal process, as we move further with the tribunal process for this particular school year, as well as it crosses the work that we're doing related to alternative education in the district. The Mid-Atlantic Equity Center is an entity that we've had a relationship with in the past and for several years, also related to that initial resolution agreement that I referenced dealing with the Office for Civil Rights. And we worked for several years with the Mid-Atlantic Equity Center to address different components related to student discipline, and the tribunal was part of that. A lot of the work that they dealt with us involved, as their title suggests, equity with students and support for students across our district. Our past practice related to the tribunal, one of the major areas of change or focus involved the fact that our district for many years had a single administrator who served as the hearing officer for our tribunals, what we call tribunals now, a single staff member. More than one administrator in the past has served in the role as the hearing officer, or the individual who reviewed every single case related to student discipline. And so that was the main component and shift from one person, one voice to our current practice that I will talk about now, related to the procedures in place that we've had since 2013-14 school year. So we do have a lead hearing officer, an administrator from the Department of Student Support Services that serves as the hearing officer for the panel, but then we also have representatives, normally 3 elementary and secondary representatives that serve, that make up the entire panel. And so a lot of conversations related to that resulted in a cross between the elementary and secondary representatives, so that we would have a full perspective of grades, as well as a chance for people with different experiences to address and review the infractions that were brought forward to the panel. Also part of our current practice involves a group of outcomes or recommendations. So when students are recommended by the school to go to a tribunal hearing, they may come there after their case is presented and learn of a reinstatement, where after a particular time that they've been out of school and their case reaches the actual tribunal, they may be reinstated at that point or shortly after that point and return to their school. They may end up with the result of a long-term suspension, which is a suspension between 11 and 364 days. And then for many years, Norfolk Public Schools has had the long-term suspension with special conditions. And you're most familiar with that in that it is a title that is unique to Norfolk, and we often referred to it in the past as cases where there was no particular end date on that. And you may recall that up until this school year, students had to come before the board for long-term suspension with special conditions, where they would have an opportunity to be considered for reinstatement before you. And then we have expulsions, where students are not afforded an opportunity to attend our schools during the full year that they are out on expulsion. Next, I'll share just some brief information that you're familiar with, but the role of the board in the process and a lot of the policy work that we've done related to the tribunals, related specifically to student disciplinary practices comes through the work of the board, through specific policies that address that, as well as your efforts to support due process rights for students. The vote that you have during your monthly review of long-term suspensions, as well as if we have any particular expulsions, and then the appeals of long-term suspensions and expulsions, as well as the reinstatements that come before the panel of the board for expulsions only. And so you remember from the fall when we had the detailed conversations about the chart and some of the changes for this school year. This is just highlights the particular, the current role of the board and some of the changes that are reflected as a result of what we did in the fall. Next, I'll share with you, over the last school year, during the 2016-17 school year, we spent a lot of time reviewing current practices, listening to particular feedback from our colleagues who serve on the panels throughout the year. We participated in the district planning meeting conducted by the district management group, and you'll hear more details about that later in the presentation. We noted a lot of feedback from our building administrators and panel members related to their experiences on the board, and you've heard us talk about this some in the past, but there are many positive things that staff members shared with us about the opportunity to serve on the impartial panel. I was speaking with a principal recently about her great interest in serving on it because it's professional development for her, as well as you've heard some of the other pieces in terms of the time commitment and some of the decision making that's often provides for number of conversations related to the decisions that come out of that. And then we've reviewed internal tribunal procedures. We're constantly reviewing that and have done that even further, particularly with our work in the planning meeting and our conversations with the district management group. I'll note a few next steps. We are finalizing our procedures in terms of what the tribunal will look like and for the upcoming school year, as well as sharing with principals. We plan to fully implement the hearing officer rotation for this upcoming school year, and we've been doing that for a significant period of time during this school year. And what I mean by that is that instead of having one particular hearing officer, we have for the last several months had a rotation where a different administrator in the Department of Student Support Services has served as the hearing officer along with the team of other administrators from our schools, and we will, we've had discussions about and plan to fully implement that. So when we start in September or October, whenever we have our first panel, we will have a rotation of various administrators who have related experience who can support the hearing officer role in our district. And then we also plan to streamline the tribunal process in terms of considering options for the implementation. So you're familiar with, and we'll highlight some of those, but the different feedback that you've received from the district management group related to their work and their feedback that they got during the alternative education study, we plan on looking further at those recommendations. We spent a lot of time during the planning meeting talking about from A to Z, all sorts of different things that we can do to impact that work, but we recognize that there will be things that we will have to implement over time. And so these initial changes where I'm referring to the hearing officer rotation as some of our internal practices, we plan to expand that in terms of our work as we move through making some adjustments with the alternative education report, as well as some other changes that we think may be necessary from the feedback that we've received from our colleagues. And then always to make sure that we're ensuring that our procedures support student success. So I'll go back to the comment that I made earlier that while we're trying to make sure that the procedures are aligned with what we as adults in the district need and to make sure that things work for us, we also always remind each other about the fact that the purpose of the tribunal and those student hearings is to make sure that we are affording students rights and that we are handling those best to make sure we're meeting their needs. A lot of those conversations will center around the transition pieces and how the district is moving forward with some of that, as well as looking at decisions that are made. We're actively in the process of working on the handbook for the upcoming school year, and there are some short-term things, but a number of long-term changes that we have to consider and plan to do that over the course of this school year as well. I wasn't sure if we were going to do, Mr. Coleman's coming up to discuss the alternative education piece, and
we
we can
pause
do
for a
questions here. Okay.
Yeah, let's.
Dr. Robinson?
I have a few, a few questions. It sounds like Mr. Singh. How is the due process, for my edification, how's the due process different in the tribunal process versus the court system?
Versus the court system?
The public court system.
Two different, and certainly Jack will help us out with that too, two different standards. The court system, those are identified by laws. The Commonwealth of Virginia, as well as certain federal guidelines for due process, meaning a student has the right to hear what are the charges against them, what are the violations that they are charged with. They have a right to understand and review any data related to that incident. And if I'm correct, they also have the ability to present.
Yes. Yeah, I'll speak after you.
Please do. Go right ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to say that the term due process, it comes from the Constitution. The government's prohibited from taking away a person's life, liberty, or property without due process. And coming out of that, the United States Supreme Court found that people have a property interest in their child's attendance in a public school. As a consequence, there's some process that has to be given. Now, how much process varies depending on what exactly is at issue. The due process that's due in a student disciplinary case is the low end of what is due. The highest would be something like a capital murder case where a person may lose their life. Independent of that, the General Assembly has, independent of what the courts have imposed as required due process, the General Assembly has passed certain statutes that, in addition, require other procedures. The main one being that depending on who the initial hearing is heard by, then it depends on who the student may appeal to afterwards, or even appeal to beyond the initial appeal.
The reason I asked the question is because in appeal processes, we often hear of of cases where there was videotape available, and the parents and the student that was accused didn't even get to see it. So I'd like to understand for myself and for the public why there's a difference, and just to make sure that we are following what we're supposed to.
Why don't I draft a memo for public consumption and for the board
That's fine.
that goes over the issues that you're
I didn't
discussing?
mean to drop that hand grenade in your lap there, but
No problem.
Yeah,
couple
and-
of quick questions. Okay.
And let me piggyback on what Mr. Cloud is saying too. One of the things that we've talked about as a district is how do we address the inconsistencies from panel to panel. And so when you hear Dr. Harold Lands talk about the information we've gleaned from the principals who serve on those panels, as well as the information we have now as we've had a rotation of hearing officers, we have a much better view of where we think some inconsistencies occur. Obviously, there are some that occur at the site of the incident when that begins. There are others that occur during the process, and those are the pieces that we're trying to clean up so that we don't hear examples like this. But then, you know, when we talk about a videotape, and Mr. Cloud will probably include some of this in his memo, there are also criteria when there are other children involved in terms of student privacy. So it's not as simple as saying, this is the video, and this is what your child's doing, because all of these other faces are there, and we have to protect those students too. So it takes a lot to make some of this information available. If there are written statements, we have to redact certain things. So there's all of that that goes on as we consider that piece of the work. But we've been able to get a much better view of the processes as we've done the sharing of the hearing officer responsibilities this year. And the principals and assistant principals have been great with helping us think. As Dr. Harold Land said, you know, principals have said, this is great PD for me. It also helps me think about what goes on at a different level. That person may be elementary and hadn't thought about it like a middle or high school, because that's part of the piece. Sometimes folks will say, well, you're elementary, you do only elementary, but they get a chance to think about it more globally. So we all of that is what we're using to make tweaks in the process. I'll be honest with the board. I originally came in and thought we might be able to just step away from this and find a different process. But as Dr. Harold Lands and Mr. Cloud and Mr. Mungo talked about that OCR piece, I realized it wasn't going to be as easy as just stepping away from it. So how do we improve it so that it meets the board's expectations, as well as we're meeting that statutory requirement around due process for students? And too often the assumption has been, if it happened, it absolutely happened that way, and therefore there's not a lot of discussion in between. And as the board knows, as you've heard appeals, there are a lot of things that aren't as they are presented.
Oh, I'm sorry, he was on.
That
Two
was just
more.
my first
Go ahead.
question. When did the long-term suspension with special conditions begin? Do you know, does anybody have that kind of information?
I
Does
do
it
not.
does it predate year?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
That's fine.
And Dr. Robinson, on that point, because I made a note, I thought we were working towards eliminating it.
Exactly.
We had talked about last year, because we had this, it was Norfolk nomenclature.
We're out of.
And we went through that whole chart. I thought we were working towards trying to be consistent. So is that still the case, that we're working on
Our
that?
goal is to work to be consistent with the state expectations, and not, just almost like instruction, not to insert extra layers of things in that. What are we required to address? What are the categories of suspension and expulsion? And how do we stay true to that and not Norfolkize it?
Which is the follow-up question to mine is what do other divisions similar to ours, how do they handle these situations? What do they do?
They're all long terms. They're not, because.
I'm talking about the whole.
He's talking about tribunal. It's about the process.
Okay, there are a variety of different ways that districts handle that. Before we actually transitioned into the tribunal process, we did a lot of research, talked with many different school districts, reviewed practices and procedures across the state as well as across the country, and found that many school districts did have tribunal processes like we have. They have panels similar to ours. They have one person doing it. They have cases where they have administrators across the district doing it. We found examples where school districts hired retirees to serve as the hearing officers. We saw all sorts of things similar to what we were doing, as well as very different from that.
In part of my career, I was comparable to Dr. Harold Lands' position, and I was the hearing officer. So 3 or 4 days a week, I had hearings from 2 to 5 p.m. And I would come in, the school administration present, the student and the parent would be there, we'd have a discussion, and the consequences were meted out at that point. Similar to here, there was an appeal process for certain suspensions that could go to the board. But, so you're right, you'll hear it. And in Worcester, once the state changed its discipline laws, I became the hearing officer.
As the superintendent?
I was an appeal officer, I should say. And I couldn't delegate the appeal officer process to anyone else.
And just for clarification, my last one, I promise. You were talking about transition pieces. Are you talking about transitioning from the current practices of the tribunal process to what your office and Dr. Boone is proposing for the coming school year and into the future?
Yes, so I was referencing that as well as the whole alternative education discussion related to how we transition and looking at how students are transitioned from their zone schools into the alternative setting, and how some of the practices impact that. Yes.
Ms. Doyle?
So I have a few questions. I would hope that when you consider your recommendations and your changes, that you consider that we make parents aware of their child's behavior at the very beginning, because I think what we have found is sometimes there's a surprise aha moment for some parents that should probably have been brought to light sooner than later. So I recommend that we let the parents, you've got to fold that into the process somehow, that there's full transparency of their child's behavior, not just at this incident, but in the past.
Right.
Also, that we be sure that all evidence is in place for all levels of reviews, and that unless all evidence is in place, there shouldn't be a review at any level. We need to make sure all reviews have all evidence for them to make their determination. Also, I think we just need to be a little bit stronger with our communication to the parents about the time and date of the actual hearing, so that there's no confusion of I didn't get the letter, or I got it after the hearing date, so that there's clearly a documented way that we know that we sent it out on a certain date and they received it on another date, and we're fully expecting them to come if they're able. If not, we schedule another time as appropriate, of course. But there's just been lots of confusion of time, date, location that I think we just need to remove from the process. I also think perhaps with having the recommendation of a person who's going to be kind of the lead of this in your office, Dr. Harold Lands.
Yes.
So that when, as a board member, we're in these deliberations, that we can ask any question about any process or any part of the process of that one hearing, and that person will know the answer. Because I think what we have found too is that there've been a lot of hands in the pot, and that one person can't always answer it because other hands have been in the pot along the way. So I think it would be helpful that whomever is in that hearing room has purview over everything, so that they have the knowledge to be able to respond to our questions. And then lastly, I just think globally, we just need to consider, I know there's likely to be legislation moving forward in the General Assembly on discipline. So I know we want to move on this sooner than later, and we want to get this moving for the fall. I get that. But we do have to be mindful and flexible, knowing that there could be new rules and regulations coming our way, not until probably July 1 of next year, but wanted to bring that to people's attention.
Can I?
Before you go, I just want to pause for a second, just so I can get some clarification from the board's perspective. So, can you clarify when you say all reviews has all evidence? What are you referring to in terms of all evidence? And
So if there's a video, then it should be apparent that the video was used at the tribunal process as well as the board review, so that the video was part of the whole process of review.
can you respond to that? Because I want to.
Can.
Yeah.
School will say there's a video, but the tribunal didn't review the video as part of its deliberations. Instead, they went by the papers, the documents that are provided.
Right.
And any statements from school administration, the students, their families, and everything else. So when the appeal gets to the board, and the board considers the video, they see it through a different lens. So what I hear Ms. Doyle saying is that tribunals should be looking at everything that's available around the case, not just the convenience of what's presented to them, and doing that. And I know Dr. Harold Lands wants to add something.
I just wanted to get some clarity in terms of the video too, because we have had a handful of cases where you know how the school brings the packet or all of the information that's available is available at tribunal, and then it's come up that, there was a video, but it wasn't provided.
Right.
And then, there's, the tribunal may find out on that date that there's a video that no one at the table has seen, which I guess the same thing can apply, that you all may not have seen if it gets to your point as well. So we that's further clarity that we can share in terms of our training, as well as continued conversations about that, because once it comes up, then naturally people want to know, well, if there's a video, how are we supposed to, decide on that when all we do have is the paper documents?
Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right.
Dr. Robinson, I still want to come back to something, so.
Because this just dovetails right there, which is should be the part of the process, and improvement process, is during the investigation, if there's a video, the tribunal should hear it, or should see it. I
Right,
mean,
and
it shouldn't
then-
come after the fact.
Right,
We
and they're
agree.
trained, that's provided during the training. That's why I said we have to just make sure we further emphasize that fact, because it's shared that whatever evidence is available should be presented, at the time. And then we've been cautioned about bringing stuff, people getting stuff afterward.
Exactly. Thinking the courts, what's the disclosure piece? They failed to disclose prior to something. And so the other piece with that, Dr. Harold Lands mentioned the training for the tribunal panels, but there's also, again, that reinforcement of what should be included when that recommendation is made for a long-term suspension. Because it shouldn't be an assumption that we bring things if there's an appeal. No, everything
Right.
that was considered in the investigation of the case should be part of the entire record.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's
Exactly.
what we're trying to get to.
Good.
Exactly.
So I just want to follow up on that. So that all makes perfect sense to me. The piece that I just want to make sure that you all can just give us a sense of, and it doesn't have to be now, but the concept that, let's say for some reason, all evidence is not there. What the consequence is if we say that nothing can occur unless all evidence is there, and I don't know how you determine what all evidence is, but I just want to make sure we're clear what that means,
Well-
if you all adopt that
For
approach.
me, it means that the review is done in conjunction with the scheduling of the tribunal. So whoever is scheduling should make sure that everything is fully there. Now, if there's a surprise that comes into the meeting, that's different from all of the evidence that the school used
Okay.
being part of the package.
In terms of bringing the student to the tribunal to begin with.
That's right.
Okay.
And so it's the oversight and review. Mr. Mungo and I and Dr. Harold Lands and I have dealt with cases where, as he reviewed it, and a couple times we have to apologize to the board, as he was reviewing in terms of his role within the tribunal, caught something at the 11th hour, and we've had to reschedule some cases. And so Dr. Harold Lands and I have talked about how do we have a review list, a checkoff list, which exists, but how are we making sure it's being utilized to say that all of these things are in place, including the parental notice piece and all of that,
Right.
before we schedule that tribunal. We try to be as expeditious in the scheduling, so most of these students are probably either home or have started some program at Madison, so there's the least interruption in education, but we owe it to everyone involved, the administration of the school, the student involved, any victims, to make sure we are thorough and not just saying, we presented it, now therefore you should accept it. And so that's what we're focusing on.
We also have to work collaboratively, I'm talking our office as well as with the schools, because what we run into, I think back to Mrs. Doyle's comment, that we run into changes in phone numbers that were working when we talked to them, initially, and then that's changed, as well as address changes. So we've talked about some things that we can put in place to make sure that the information matches, or the last time the family was before someone at the school, that they provide an update address. But we work on that constantly, because we're aware that information changes, and we get feedback from the schools about, well, I talked to them yesterday, or our office talked to them today, and then now the numbers change. But we know that's something that we definitely have to work on constantly. I have a question for Mrs. Doyle, just for clarification. The piece about, in terms of people being able to answer all the questions, for example, in the appeals, I wanted to get some clarity, because in the past, we have had situations where if we knew that there may be questions that might come up by the board, particularly that the school staff might be able to answer. For years, we had like one person or groups of people that would come and would be like in this room while we're down the hall, and very rarely did we ever call them in. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on, in addition to the hearing officer who might have been present during the tribunal, are there other people that you might want us to have here just in case, as well as, I know we had a case where some questions came up about the fact that a call was made and we had like a conference call dealing with a specific case, which I know that brought up some questions. So I just wanted to make sure I was clear on, or we can talk later about exactly, you know, the extent to which we want to do that or need to do that.
Well, and I think every case is different.
Yes, ma'am.
However, some have been presented before us where we've had questions where the individual from Student Support Services has not had line of sight to be able to answer that question.
Right.
And yet then we're making a decision without full information. So we need to have access to people to be able to answer those questions
Right.
while we're in deliberations.
Right.
So we can say, well, what did the somebody say from the
Right.
school, or what did
Okay.
they know? Because, for instance, you may not know that.
Right.
Even if you were part of the tribunal process, it
Right.
still might be a question that outside of that actual deliberation that's relevant to the decision or the
Yes.
determination.
Right.
So I can't speak to the who.
Right, I
And I do
understand.
want to be mindful of people's time. We don't want them sitting around just waiting for us to dream up questions.
No,
But
I
if
hear you.
people can be at least available.
Right, and
I
that's
think
what-
that would be helpful, because we want to know that we're making a decision with every piece of information out there possible.
Right, and we'll talk about that further, because we can definitely do that or come up with some balance there, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna come to you, Ms. Basine, because, so we're talking about the tribunal process, but the conversation right now is really about the appeal process, is that?
Well, you only get to the appeal through the
No,
tribunal.
No, I understand
Right,
that.
okay.
But I'm saying that, Ms. Doyle, what I hear you're speaking of is when it goes through the tribunal process and then somebody appeals it, and then the board is hearing the appeal, these questions and information and things of that type, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, because
Yes.
maybe one of the things we need to do then is come back as a board and talk about that appeal, you know, what our process is when it comes to us for appeal, and what types of things we want to make sure we have in place. You know, just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even some of what I articulated, the evidence part,
Oh,
for
yeah, no,
instance,
I'm not-
video, it should be at the tribunal level.
yeah, well,
When
I'm
they're
not, de-
being first reviewed.
yeah, no, I'm not debating that. I just want to make sure that, because I was getting confused between the tribunal process and where we were, and then the appeal process and what things we wanted and what things we were trying to make sure they had. So I'm just trying to get some clarity on that
And-
piece of it.
And I'm following the conversation because there are practices in the tribunal that have led to the
Well, that's what I
questions.
thought,
Yeah,
right.
at the appeal, so it's a great exchange of thought on it, yeah.
So tell me again about the timing. When do you think you'll have the recommendations in place?
As far as the complete change, we talked about, there would be some initial ones, as I mentioned, just as school started, and then for second semester, we would have had an opportunity to have a further review and dealing with the district planning committee,
Okay.
as well as talk further with our colleagues related to the alternative education piece. So I would imagine that some of these things we can, of course, get in place, very quickly. And I mean, the training is something that we do on an ongoing process. Second semester, there are opportunities for some changes there. And then, obviously, just like at the end of the school year, for the upcoming school year, for the 18-19 school year, we would have had another opportunity for training. And I think that it's always been a growth process, a fluid process, making sure that, again, we're providing the support necessary to still, provide the service for the district and for students as well. Yeah, but there's some things we will make
Well,
sure
can y'all
to
just
already talk with
But
principals
break it
about.
out for us? You know, so since you have first semester procedures, just what they are. and then
Absolutely.
Second
Thank you.
semester procedures,
Thank
what
you.
they are, and then we know.
And part of that first semester will be it's linked back to the process of investigating cases. And because you all are aware that we had some that weren't fully investigated. And so then going back to the investigatory piece, the completion of the packets that include all evidence that was considered and was available. And so those are the pieces that we will have ready for the fall.
Great.
We will monitor, tweak, improve that, and then we will certainly outline then what the second semester will begin to look like.
Ms. Basine?
Well, some of my questions have been asked, but one in particular, which is related to the, I think, the evidence piece, is in your review of the tribunal process, and did you discover or see a need to make any changes to the manifestation of disabilities specific to, that subgroup of children? And if you could describe also the manifestation process, how that's determined, and just so that we're all on the same page about that.
Are you? Want me to take manifestation?
Yes, ma'am.
Manifestation is a responsibility of the IEP committee.
Mm-hmm.
There are timelines associated with the incident occurring, and when the manifestation meeting, the timeline by which the manifestation meeting has to occur. It should never be a case that the tribunal is scheduled prior to the manifestation. We have seen cases where the child is before a tribunal and they haven't even had the manifestation. Those are some of the cases, again, that as Mr. Mungo has reviewed, he's caught those and said, wait a minute, timing is off on that. And that's the type of internal quality control review that we're trying to put in place, intending to put in place, so that we catch them. It's not just Mr. Mungo. If he catches it, he may find something else he thought about more deeply. So, and in terms of what Student Support Services does in that, is just as the incident and the trigger for discipline that could lead to a tribunal hearing or long-term suspension begins at the school level, so does the initiation of the process for the manifestation review. That has to be triggered at the same time that the infraction appears to be one that would be recommended for long-term suspension. And we have to also consider, as part of that manifestation, how many days a student has already received discipline, because there are a couple of triggers for what are next steps. How many days, how many separate suspensions begin to be a cumulative long-term suspension for students with disabilities. So that's triggered at the building level with the administration, with the special ed department chair or a lead teacher, and those coordinators that support those schools. That's where all of that happens. Student Support Services gets involved when the packet is then referred for a tribunal hearing. Part of that quality control piece is making sure that the manifestation review has occurred, what that looks like, and then that's a readiness piece that we can begin to think about scheduling.
Okay, but have you come across, or is there a quality control measure or process where the manifestation is complete and the evidence to support that is checked?
That has to be checked as part of the manifestation review.
Okay.
You not only look at the circumstances of the incident, you also have to do a review of the child's disability and all of the data that determine what are the behaviors, what are the things we should see based on that child's disability through all of the evaluations, the behavioral supports that may or may not be included in the IEP. That's why it's important that all of that occurs prior to the tribunal hearing being scheduled. Okay. Because if it's found to be a manifestation of the child's disability, then the long-term suspension is not the appropriate consequence unless, and we have some emergency procedures that the federal government allow us to do if it's a dangerousness situation. And so that would be another trigger.
Okay.
So the training for the manifestation reviews occurs annually also. Mr. Mungo is part of that in making sure, again, what are we looking for? How do we look at that? And that annual reminder he has for all administrators and all of us that that no one entity determines the outcome of an IEP meeting or a manifestation review, that it is the team. Now, a parent or the administrator or the school district have the right to disagree, and there's a process where you attach why you disagree and what that looks like. But that's how we work with the manifestation. That's part of our annual training for administrators that we have to do, and Mr. Mungo has been very good in supporting that training for that.
Okay. Great, thank you. And are there any specific policy changes that you see as a result of any of the changes made here?
Not so far in terms of the policy. Any changes? No, we haven't. The initial things that I shared and that Dr. Boone mentioned, no, there aren't any required. We have talked to Mr. Cloud and Mr. Mungo related to some of this, and we'll continue to communicate with them regularly as we go through the process to make sure, we always are in line with if there are any changes needed. Even before we've started the discussions, we reached out to them.
And I want to, when you talk about the policy changes, and Ms. Doyle talked about some legislative changes that may be coming, effective July 1, we have some notices that we have to do. You were mentioning notices to families and about student alleged behavior or incidents prior to a major incident. And in the bullying legislation that was adopted this year, as part of our Code of Student Conduct, there is a 5-day notice requirement to parents whose child has been alleged to have been a bullier. And so all of that is part of our summer readiness and training that we will be putting in place for that. So, and to the point about the policy piece, then we also, through our VSBA policy service, then will receive any recommended amendments or adjustments to policies based on legislative action from that too.
Right.
So we kind of triangulate and have those check-in points to make sure that we're on top of that.
Dr. Gabriel?
Thank you. Dr. Lands, just clarify for me, who qualifies as a hearing officer? Is that a designated person? Because I know you said you're going to be rotating them. Is that a designated administrator? Is that someone in your department? Is that someone who goes through training?
We've had a designated administrator currently, and what we plan for this upcoming school year is to rotate a number of administrators in the Department of Student Support Services. All of them are senior coordinators, and only those who, so far that we've rotated, are people who have backgrounds in this particular work in terms of some student discipline, some of the transition pieces that have worked in a variety of different areas. That's who we've used so far, and we still plan to do that. There is training that is provided. We also have people who go and observe and work with, but in all cases, they're staff members who have either served on the tribunal in the past, have served on the reinstatement panels, but also have backgrounds of working with student discipline and things related to special education services as well. We try not to, or we haven't so far had our administrators who do not have the related training or experiences do that. However, I'll point out back to what I mentioned earlier, we did find examples of where there were school districts who used people who, in terms of impartial panel members, that worked in a variety of positions that had nothing to do with student services as well.
But they weren't the hearing officer.
Right, not the actual hearing officer. They
panel.
were on the panel, yes,
The
ma'am.
officer would understand.
Yes.
The rules and procedures.
Absolutely, yes.
And would we offer that training to administrators who are interested in becoming that, or are you designating the individuals?
I think that's a conversation that we would have further in terms as a district, how far that might expand. I mean, currently we have been using 3 or 4 administrators within our department. There are many people across the district who have the training and the experience who could also serve as that, but we had not talked about that, at least as initial plan, to rotate that much further than what we've done.
I think we have to, that's not a body of work that you want to dilute too much.
Exactly.
Right, right.
And so we've had success in these last 6-7 months with, in terms of the experiences that the coordinators and others have had. Right now, I'm not looking to move that beyond
Good.
the level of a coordinator.
Right.
The rotation of the principals and the assistant principals as part of the panel, we will continue to do that process. But in that rotation would be within the direct sphere of influence and control of Dr. Lands and her team.
Okay, that's very
Yeah.
good to know. And then the other question that I had was, as you're moving forward in collecting the data and looking at your policies and procedures, and we might already be doing this, but keeping a steady track of when the student is charged with the violation and they are asked to leave the building, and are we tracking what is happening to that child, whether they are being placed in an alternative setting, suspended from school, how many days they're out before they're placed into whatever the tribunal determines, so that we have an idea as to where that child is, and are they receiving services if necessary.
That's part of that monthly report that we provide to the board, and sometimes we'll say not enrolled.
Right.
And other times we'll show the date that they are enrolled. Now, of course, that's usually accurate as of the Thursday or Friday prior to the board meeting. Dr. Harold Lands attempts to update those if we know something that's happened by the Wednesday board meeting that someone has already enrolled. One of the things, as we talked about the transitions, and when Mr. Coleman talks a little bit more about that, making sure that we are paying close attention to students who haven't enrolled yet, so we can figure out why not,
Yeah.
and intervene at that point without letting it go too long.
I guess that's what I'm getting at, as we do receive the report, I just want to know, are we looking at it to do something about it, or are we just monitoring it? I guess that's how I should say, but that's,
We're looking at it to
helpful.
intervene.
Mhm.
Yes.
That's it, thank you very much.
All right, so now I'm confused again.
Uh-oh.
So the time period from infraction to the student appearing for tribunal, is that what we were just talking about? Or are we talking about from the time that the tribunal takes action and makes a determination, and then whether or not, so let's say the tribunal determines that a child needs to report to Madison, and then we get a report that says, incident occurred, tribunal took action, here was the disposition, and here's where the student is now.
I think we're looking at both.
Yes.
Okay.
We're looking at both, because the tribunals need to be scheduled timely
Right,
to minimize if the student is going to be returned to school.
right, get that part, okay.
Right. We also want to make sure that once a decision is upheld, some parents will enroll their students while they're waiting for the appeal. Others don't. And so that's part of that intervention that we were talking about. If a parent is not enrolling their child, why not? And what can we do to support educational services even as they wait for the appeal for tribunals?
Right, so making sure that they have, the educational services are taking place is different from, at least in my mind, from whether a child is eligible. So I thought, as long as, if we're talking about suspensions, I thought children were eligible for services, even though it may not be in school, versus when we talk about an expulsion.
And one of the things, and this may clarify, so we do, back to what Dr. Boone mentioned, like about the report, there are cases where, like, some time ago, there were issues that we addressed as a district about the orientation, and so that was changed, and so that we don't have that issue anymore, generally, where students were out for an extended period of time waiting to get into an alternative program. So that has pretty much eliminated that concern. We have had cases where, while parents are informed that, you should enroll your child in Madison, so by the time you get the report, you might even you've seen some cases where the date has already passed for them to return, if it's a 13-day suspension or something. Sometimes parents do opt not to, for a variety of reasons, not to send their children to Madison, for example, and we have conversations with them about making sure that they are in school. There are some parents who may indicate that they were a little confused about whether or not they had to do that, but we have conversations with those parents as well, because they do have the opportunity to participate in the alternative setting. Occasionally, we do have families who will say, well, because my child, a decision hasn't been made, or we haven't been, informed of the decision, then I'm going to keep my child out, and we do not suggest that they do that, because they're not, but sometimes they'll feel like, well, if I enroll my child, then that means he or she did what I know they didn't do.
Right, but on the communication side, I get that, 'cause to me, that goes back to what Ms. Doyle originally was
Right.
talking about with the
Yes.
checklists and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure I'm clear that, let's say you have that scenario, are we saying that there's something else we should be doing beyond notifying the parent and having the parent and the
Well,
child?
We do have some other steps.
Okay.
If a parent is refusing educational services or something like that, I mean, it's a very last resort.
Right.
But it can fall into the truancy thing, because even though, or failure to have their child access services, even though they are suspended and we're making educational services available to them, and they are not showing evidence that they are somewhere else receiving education, it's a violation of compulsory attendance up until a board expels a student. Then compulsory attendance doesn't kick in for our district. So there are some other consequences for kids who sometimes fall off the radar because the families are not cooperative with their child receiving.
Now, I follow the consequence side. I was trying to hear from the board side, or was there a suggestion that we think the administration or the staff should be doing something more, and if so, what that something more was? That's what I was trying to, because otherwise we'll come out of here with some expectation, and
Yes.
then we'll be back talking to you, say, well, how come you haven't done X, Y, Z?
Right.
And if that's something that the board is asking for, I just want to make sure there's some clarity around what we're saying.
I think what
to
I'm
the
hearing
administration.
is for us to continue to keep our eye on students who are not accessing available educational services, to make sure that they aren't lost.
Right,
Yes.
okay, all right.
Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I need to give apologies, Dr. James Mitchell, I didn't realize she was sitting over there, so when I answered the special ed piece, I wasn't cutting her off, I just didn't realize she was in the room, so my apologies.
All right, anything else for Dr. Lance? Good for now?
Thank you very much. This was a
Okay.
great presentation.
Glad we did
Good
this.
discussion.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Coleman, I guess you're next.
Not sure which remote I'm working with here. Which? Okay. So, continuing on with alternative education. I'm going to begin with the Open Campus Alternative Site. As you all know, we have ended our agreement with Edison Learning Bridgescape, and so we're going to talk briefly about that. We're going to talk transition from the current Open Campus site, which is the old Coronado building, and then new adjustments going into this next year for Open Campus. So to begin with, ending agreement with the Edison Learning Bridgescape. The agreement ended June 30th. If it were leap year, it would have been on the 31st, but it's either date, it's ended. And so our relationship with Edison Learning and Bridgescape is now over. The technology has been returned. That would be all of the laptops, some of the printers. All of that has been recovered by Edison Learning itself. Edison Learning curriculum platform access has ended. And so even before the school year ended, we were making our transition over to GradPoint and Desire to Learn. So students, as they finished an Edison course, say in May, even though we still had a month of school left, we started them in their next course in GradPoint so that it would be a smoother transition. All of the furniture and miscellaneous items that were owned by or provided by Edison Learning, they have donated to the Educational Foundation for NPS use. So we will be moving the bulk of that furniture, tables, chairs, a printer, or I should say a copier, and some other miscellaneous pieces, even some medical equipment. So it's really a great opportunity, and we thank Edison Learning for providing those items for us. The Edison Learning staff contracts have ended as of the 30th as well, and so those 3 employees have moved on to other things as well. Moving into the transition from the current open campus site, we have basically boxed everything up. We have everything up in the front 2 rooms ready to be moved. We expect to have a truck making that move by the end of or early August, hopefully sooner if possible. We do have several seniors, or in the senior cohort group for this year, that we are continuing in their program. So we provide 1 open campus teacher on a rotating basis so we can keep every content area covered. But they are going to Lake Taylor High School, and they've joined in with the Lake Taylor High School summer school program for the high school students. And so those students will have an opportunity to graduate by the end of the summer as well. So in terms of transition from the current site, everything is on board, everything is going well. Once we have everything out that we'll be using for open campus, then the district will come in because there will be some other additional items in there that could be dispersed to other locations throughout the division for their use. New adjustments for open campus. The curriculum, as I said earlier, will be provided primarily through GradPoint and Desire to Learn courses. We have a new director recruiter position, so where before we had a director and we also had a separate person that did enrollment recruitment, we've joined those 2 components simply because we don't need it to be 2 separate people, because we're now only serving 1 master, so to speak, in terms of NPS, and not having to report to both Edison and NPS. So that director position has been filled. We have new student hours. And so with the location being at the Norfolk Technical Center, the new student hours will be an afternoon session, which will be from 1 until 4:15, and then an evening session, which will be from 4:30 to 7:45. There will not be a morning session as we begin this new school year. The advantage to that is a couple of pieces. One, with the morning session, that now makes it available for open campus students to have better access to courses in the morning through NTC. And so we have a number of students that have been accepted and will be in courses at NTC. They'll do that in the morning, and then they'll just transition right into either an afternoon or an evening session. Most will do the afternoon session, so that creates more availability there. The evening session we have created, we have had an issue over the last 3 years with a number of students that have child care issues, and they can't get child care, so they can't get to a morning or an afternoon session. But now that we have an evening session, they have other family members that are now off the job, and we can make available the evening session for the student because they now have family that can help with the child care. We're hoping that will solve some of it. It won't solve all of it, but we hope that that's a good fix. So the new hours begin. All of the returning students were given a choice of which session they wanted to identify with. And so we have our returning students already selected, and as we recruit new students in, they'll choose which session works best for them. And students always have the option of coming to both sessions if they so desire. We don't limit them to one or the other. They can come to both. Security, clerical, and custodial support, which was supported either by NPS or by Edison in the previous site, will now all be covered through the NTC, the Norfolk Technical Center site. So we believe we've got all bases covered in terms of all of the services that were provided at the old site, we now have at the new site as well. Moving on, or not.
Can I ask a question about?
We can let them we can come back.
Oh, come back, okay.
Yeah, I'm making
All right.
notes too, if everybody.
No worries.
Okay. There's not a lot much more. Madison Center. Madison Center, it kind of comes back to the district management group report, but one of the first items that we're going to work with in terms of Madison, and it kind of carries over with what Dr. Harold Lands was talking about as well, and that is, we want to work with our counselors. We've had a number of counselor changes, both at Madison and at some of our schools, and so this is our opportunity to come back and do some retraining to effectively transition and support students from their zone school once they've been identified to attend Madison, and then once they've completed their term at Madison, transitioning back to the zone school. We do have a packet, we do have a procedure for it, but with new people coming on board, we felt the need to retrain, and it was also one of the recommendations that came out of the DNC group, as well.
So do me a favor, since I know you're going to go into the rest of dealing with study items, since I think there may be some questions specific to Open Campus and maybe Madison, you mind if we pause there and address those?
You're fine.
I'm coming to you. I just want to make sure it works for the presenter.
That was my
Okay.
question.
Dr. Robinson?
How much money are we saving?
I don't have the exact dollar amount that we're saving, but we're certainly saving on facility costs. We're going to be saving on personnel costs. We're certainly going to be saving on what our contractual obligations were to Edison Learning, because our contract with Edison Learning was based on having a specific number of dropout students and our ability to capture funding from the state for that specific number. However, we weren't able to match or meet that number of students at any given time this last school year. And so we'll save significant amounts of money just based on the number of students that are enrolled and how much money we can capture from the state.
And Ms. Ingram was going to provide a little more financial
We
information.
would save,
It's on.
we would save at least $400,000, since the contract in itself to Edison was $440,000. And then on top of that, it's the other positions like John was talking about. So the salary for that, plus the utilities for Coronado.
I would like a report on that.
Absolutely,
As soon as possible.
absolutely. But the 440,000, the grad point is something we already had contracts with. So it was a matter of maximizing the licenses and everything that we had with that. So, part of what we were purchasing with Edison was their e-course platform. Because we are linking it to our own e-course platform that has gotten great results, that was a big cost savings. The staffing piece, there was one additional staffing, the director piece, director/recruiter piece, was part of what we were paying also through the Edison. So, but again, the facility savings are great. I'm real pleased as we talk about students being able to access some of the CTE courses and everything, and so that makes it a real win-win, yeah.
Ms. Basine?
So a couple of questions. So you talked about enrollment this past year. What kind of enrollment are you looking at for the upcoming school year at Open Campus? Is it?
To open the school year, we never know from day to day because we have some students that say they're coming back but don't. But now that we have the new director/recruiter in place, she will be going back and touching base with each of those students. So right now, we're expecting somewhere between 40 and 50 students that will come back on the immediate basis, and then we will, add, our first priority would be to pull dropouts in from there. But the opportunity that we have now, that it's completely an NPS product, is now we can come back and look at the number of students that we put in place that are already in the high school, behind in credits, haven't dropped out yet, but maybe it's not working for them in their high school, and Open Campus might be a better solution for them. So in the previous contract, that we had with Edison, we had 25 free slots based on having that 100 dropouts. We're not tied to that anymore.
Okay. Well,
And
that,
so we can now utilize whatever number of slots we have appropriately based on dropouts as well as behind in credits.
okay. Well, that was the second part of my question. If we have greater flexibility in allowing, other students who may be behind or not even behind, but require, an alternative setting, for a variety of reasons. So
We will have that flexibility, but I will also say that we're going to be very cautious because we want students to stay in their zone schools and be successful there first.
Okay.
And so it will be a relationship in terms of, the Open Campus staff as well as the zone school in terms of acceptance of that student into the program.
That was one of the challenges we were experiencing with Open Campus. We were almost competing against ourselves sometimes. And so a student who is very close to graduating and all things equal should be encouraged to stay in their currently attended school for success. Like I said, unless there's some extenuating circumstances that we're trying to address. but we were almost finding ourselves trying to count the same child twice. And part of the problem was in order to get some of the open campus recruitment numbers up, they were going after those kids that were right there on the fringe. Well, those aren't new kids because they hadn't dropped out, they were still in school. And so for open campus, you couldn't count a new student unless they had dropped out and been recovered. And so they were filling a lot of their numbers with students who were right there on the fringe. And, you know, I've had conversation with parents, Mr. Coleman has, Dr. Rogers has, and others, and we'll talk about whether or not that's a right place for them. And we know some success stories. We actually recovered a kid, several. I mean, they had 24 graduates this year, but one that I think everybody, including Mr. Butts, had been working with. So we were trying to get this young man graduated. And finally, through the convincing of Mr. Coleman and others, came into open campus and marched in June. So it's that level of involvement that we're trying to do. But again, this was a student that was not in school, and so that's a true recovery student. He had been out about a semester, and was a true recovery student and made it over.
So are we going to turn I'm sorry, were you finished?
No.
No, Tanya was up and.
Are you finished?
Yes, I am. Oh, okay. Still, go ahead.
Are we turning Coronado back over to the city?
There will be a recommendation coming to the board probably in September to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ms. Wagner, no, go ahead.
Just piggybacking on what you were saying about getting kids in and a success story of a student actually graduating. Do we have, because they're non-traditional students, do we have something, some kind of transitional something that we can offer that can be like a recruiting tool, or maybe tying in with the TRIO program or something like that, that could be?
I'm not sure I'm following. Recruiting dropouts or recruiting?
No. Recruiting students, a transition from the time that they, something to encourage them to stay in and finish, and transition to maybe a career or something that we can hook them up to, like maybe the TRIO program or something like that.
Certainly, Mr. Coleman works with high school students all the time, but we know with that relationship, if we can find that hook to keep them in that school, usually they're there because they are that close. And they aren't students necessarily that are undercredited or behind. It's just they are in that senior year and beginning to have their own self-doubt, or things are happening and they want to shut down. If we can keep them there, they're on a path for success to begin with. We just want to make sure we don't lose them through dropping out and they don't finish that high school diploma, which would impact, that success. But Mr. Coleman can talk about what we do to support kids like that.
Can you all tell us what TRIO is at the same time?
Well, it's
TRIO, you've heard about Gear Up, TRIO, Access. These are, TRIO and Gear Up are federally supported programs that are designed to link high school students to future success. And so they come in, schools that have Gear Up counselors will have extra counselors on board, and they are trying to work with students to help them navigate high school with some of those personal challenges, as well as setting goals and being successful.
And they really do target programs like your open campus and something like that.
Most of the students that come into open campus are coming in with substantial baggage of some kind from within their home life or their community. And so it impacts on their educational life in their zone school. So by recovering them, pulling them in as dropouts, or even if we pull them in as behind in credits, you know, our first goal is to show them a vision down the road, because they're tending to live from day to day. And so if we can show them that vision down the road, and we do that by hooking them up with different folks. We stay very closely tied to the zone schools. So the graduation coaches stay very involved with the kids as best we can. We have the college access counselors also involved with them. We work very closely with Tidewater Community College. We actually have some of our open campus students who have now gone on to Tidewater. We do field trips with our students over to Tidewater's campus as well. And so we look for different opportunities, and at the same time, we also try to build internships and relationships with businesses, within the community as well. So we try to, tackle it from, a variety of angles. Sometimes we're more successful with others. Again, it's, convincing the student that, there is this opportunity, jump for it, and sometimes they're hesitant to jump. But one thing, that we have learned with our open campus teachers working with the students is we're patient and we're persistent. And so as a result, usually we're able to win them over. If we're not, many of them come in with their attendance problems. If we can't correct some of that attendance piece, that does slow down our progress. But once we get them convinced, their attendance goes up. And just like any other student in school, once they attend, usually we can be pretty successful with them.
Dr. Robinson?
Does this, or how does this include the overage for grade student?
So right now, we are not serving the overage for grade students other than the 2 that we still have left from the original cohort. And if you remember back to the ODU study, that recommendation came out, and our own review after that first year with the overage for grade students, the model simply wasn't being successful for those students. They weren't mature enough, or they weren't comfortable being in that same setting with 18 and 19-year-old high school students. And so as a result, they never really got off to a good start. And so as a result, right now, we have 2 students, that are still left from that original cohort that are still making progress, and we hope to be able to graduate, at some point. The others have either dropped out or have returned to their zone school and are in their zone school at this time.
You will recall in the recommendations from the District Management Council and the Alternative Ed Program Review, that was one of those longer-term goals that they said, if we look at the possibility of restructuring what's currently going on at Madison and how we begin to expand, that would be the place where we should begin. That process should be where we would really take on addressing overage for grade students, because currently we don't have the capacity, facility-wise or otherwise, to be able to meet those needs.
Reverend Haywood?
What's the philosophy for a student who is having difficulty at his home school and decides he wants to go to the open campus because he just feels like he can make it there? Are we opening the door for students in regular school to make these choices?
No. Certainly, we're going to listen to that student. We're going to listen to that parent and that family in terms of what they want. But really, it needs to be a wraparound approach. Have we utilized all of our resources, in the zone school first to try to support that student? Have we reviewed enough? Have we looked at that student and all of the circumstances that surround that student's ability to move forward? And then at that point, the school can make a recommendation jointly with the parent and the student, and that if they're all on the same page together, then we would put something in place potentially for that student behind in credits. Just because a student isn't happy today doesn't mean they won't be happy 2 weeks from now at their zone school. There really needs to be a set of circumstances, that would drive that decision. And usually it tends to be, a student getting close to the end of the year, and mathematically, based on the structure in the zone school, they're not going to be able to complete successfully. But if they are able to get to open campus because they can work at their own pace, that might give them different opportunity. You might also have a student, that is in their 3rd year of high school, but they're still classified a freshman based on credits. And so we would look at that student because they're already uncomfortable because they're still sitting in freshman classes. If they've shut down and we've tried all of our other potential interventions in working with that student, that would be a student that we would look at. So there's a lot of different kinds of circumstances that we'll look at. It'll be on a case-by-case basis. But we've already run into, in the past 3 years with the program, a student gets over to open campus and then 2 or 3 friends see it, and so they want to get over there as well. And we've had to basically work with the parent and that student to say, no, this is not right for you because, and go through that circumstance.
I believe that the connection of the open campus with, said, the CTE program is a huge win. And I think that to the degree that that connection is strengthened and advertised to the public, I think you will attract more students back because they will see an opportunity to actually pursue a career path through the CTE. So
we agree.
Can I get one last one from Ms. Wagner? We can move on unless you. So let me get Ms. Wagner, and I'll come back to you.
Yeah, Dr. Boone, I remember when you first came in. I know that was one of the. I'm back to overage for grade because that's kind of a concern. I don't know what percentage of kids we lose to that, and I know that was something that you talked about. Are we looking at some kind of plan, or? And I know you just mentioned Madison, but something that we can do with those kids. I just hate to see us.
Well, that's exactly that focus. And as we, I indicated earlier that the first year of addressing the recommendations from the Alter Ed program review were those that we could afford, which were basically those that were cost neutral.
Mm-hmm.
We're building out a larger set of recommendations, and some of that may come through the educational planning work that we're doing and the presentation to the board in October with some specific timelines. But we agree, the overage for grade group is someone that we don't want to lose, but we have to be careful how we define the overage for grade. Some folks think if you're 1 year behind, you're overage for grade. Well, that could be based on birthday and not that you failed anything.
Right.
And so we will need to review our data again of who are truly our overage for grade students that aren't meeting with success.
Mm-hmm.
Too often, school districts will say if you're overage for grade, they put everybody in the same basket, and then we pull kids from successful environments to put them in an alternative. We want to look at who are the overage for grade students that aren't making it academically, and usually when they aren't making it academically, we see the behavioral piece
Right,
connected
exactly.
to it. Yeah.
So just kind of put our criteria in place. I think.
So, Ms. Bassina, can we allow them to get through the last few? You have something that's.
It's probably a quick
Go for it.
response.
Go ahead.
Yeah, is there a long-range plan of having childcare at?
That's still, an option that will be considered. It's a difficult one, simply because there's laws and there's inspections and all of those kinds of things that go with childcare. The advisory board for open campus still will exist and transition, and so that's an area that they've still been, focused on as well, and we would continue to support, that research and that opportunity to see if we can't make that happen, yes.
All right, let's knock out the last few.
Okay. So, moving on to the district management group alternative study update. As you will recall, January 4th, the district management group came here and they presented their findings from the study. From that presentation, then Norfolk Public Schools conducted a planning meeting that was facilitated by DMC on March 31st. And so if you recall, there were a number of different next steps that were provided as opportunities by DMC. Some of them, as Dr. Boone said, involved more financial requirements than others. So in that planning meeting on March 31st, the division identified 2 major opportunities to address. The first one was to build upon the current positive behavior interventions and supports, the PBIS system and framework, to provide a continuum of social, emotional, and behavioral supports for students in order to reduce the number of students needing alternative placements. So we want to reduce the number of students that go into those alternative placements. Oops, I shouldn't have done that. Altogether. And so that work will then continue, if I can get back to that slide. And so determining the organizational support, what that leadership would look like, because that has broken down a little bit, and the funding that will be there to support the PBIS program. Design, redefine structures and the tiers, both at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. Mapping out aligned processes, including the expectations for the program, universal screening, data metrics, and interventions. All of these were components identified from that planning meeting. Mapping out the staff roles. We've had in the past where it's been individuals that have been responsible for monitoring and continuing with the PBIS program. It really needs to be done through committee work at the school level as well, so that it's more than just one person, so that if somebody transitions out, there's still other people to carry on the work. And we've lost some of that momentum with PBIS simply because of transitions with staff members in schools. And then obviously to monitor and assess the progress. And so that is the work around PBIS that needs to be focused on and will be focused on as we go into the beginning of this school year.
A companion piece to this was something we talked about during the report from District Management Council as it relates to the alternative program studies, and that was our view of what's the most appropriate system of supports for secondary students. We've started some conversations. We had some conversations within the district regarding restorative justice. The police department was looking at restorative justice as a diversionary program, so now we're at the table together thinking about possibilities around restorative justice. And I also had a conversation last week with the Deputy Director of Juvenile Court Services. I know that's not the current title, at the state level, and we were talking about some things that the state has in place relative to supporting things such as restorative justice. So PBIS is what is still our main program, but we know we need to do something else at the secondary level, so we've initiated that work also.
Oh, let him go.
Yeah, one more slide.
One more slide.
Okay.
If we'll go.
That's
That's
it.
So the second piece that came out of that planning meeting was to clearly articulate a process for students entering and transitioning out of alternative placements to maximize student success. So I've already addressed it partially with what we're going to be doing with Madison, but we're also going to be looking at assessing current policies and alignment to practices. And so we'll be working very closely with Dr. Harold Lands and her area in terms of making sure that we have alignment with policies and practices, redefining roles and responsibilities within the division, designing a streamlined process that's effective for entry criteria and identification, the tribunal model and process, and exit criteria and process. So that work has begun, along with what Dr. Harold Lands has already shared this evening in regard to the tribunal process and what we're going to do with Madison. And we will also expand that out and include Open Campus and Net Academy transitions at the same time as well.
And ACES.
And ACES. Any other questions?
Ms. Basine, I think you had something?
Yeah, well, you talked about restorative justice at the secondary level, but I wonder, and I believe it's come up in past conversations about some pilot programs. So what are your thoughts, or has the division considered mindfulness programs at the elementary level, which could benefit all, all students?
We will be looking at that in conjunction to our PBIS strengthening.
Okay.
And what are some other tools we can put in the boxes, support that. We know that there are a number of entities out there that support the mindfulness work. That's pretty much where you focus on your behavior, relaxation, breathing, and all of that. And it's really bearing some great fruit. I think I shared I had a school in Massachusetts that had fully adopted a mindfulness program and what that looks like. So we'll be looking at that in conjunction with our PBIS strengthening. And what are some things, again, to Mr. Coleman's point, that the goal of what we're trying to accomplish is to reduce the number of students who experience violations of the Code of Student Conduct which would therefore reduce the number of transitions and placements in alternative settings because of those pieces. So we're trying to begin to front-load success as it relates to behavior rather than only having a consequential program.
And, oh, sorry, and the trauma-informed care, is that something that?
All of that's on the table.
All of it.
Trauma-informed care. Dr. Birdsong has been doing some work with that, Dr. Harold Land. So we are fully engaged in that. But again, not bringing it in as the flavor of the week. But how do we begin to address that where the needs are greatest? And what does that look and feel like? Because we can easily overload the system's capacity to support all of this at one time.
Dr. Robinson?
I had a patient that wanted to set up a yoga program at Madison because of the mindfulness aspect of that. I applaud you for working with the Norfolk Police Department with the restorative justice. Are there plans to work with the juvenile court system downstairs?
That's what I'm starting at the state level because I have a direct contact with the deputy director who used to be the head of the juvenile court system here in Norfolk. And so as we have talked about what are some resources that we can bring to the table, she shared some things that they have. And so absolutely, when we've talked about who will be at the table with the restorative justice team, court services will be a part of that. But right now, in the initial examination of what will work for us, I had restorative justice in Worcester and a couple of high schools, but I didn't have the police as part of that. So we're excited and about the opportunity to figure out how we will make that work for us. Because they have a goal as a diversionary program.
Sure.
And we have a goal as a diversionary program, but not from necessarily the court system, but also from violations of the Code of Student Conduct, so that they can be successful. So we both are trying to divert from something, and so how do we blend it in a way? Because they too want to see the reduction in the number of students who are referred to the courts from schools. Mm-hmm. So part of that is that the mindset of how we're approaching this.
Well, I imagine we have some connections with the court system in Norfolk, and getting to the juvenile courts would be appropriate.
Oh, yeah. No, we aren't going to exclude anyone, but it's important for us to know where we want to be as a team before we go take that to somebody else.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman.
Thank you.
That was a great update, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Feel free to stretch your legs as we go to policies. Dr. Boone, I think that's next.
I'm peeping over. Okay, Dr. Birdsong is here. Let me pull that part up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jordan, Dr. Gabriel, members of the board. Thank you for this opportunity this afternoon. We have a few policies that have been provided to you for your review. Some of the policies are new, some have been updated because of the Code of Virginia updates and recommendations from the School Board Policy Review Committee and some advisory committees of the school board. We are happy to address any specific questions that you may have about these policies at this time.
So I offered a couple.
Yes.
I think one was, let me find it. Well, you know what they were.
Yes.
So
Dr. Lynch,
one dealt with the suicide prevention and the
Bring your own device.
the other dealt with BYOD.
So since our last discussion regarding the suicide prevention and post-prevention, we've had a number of conversations about that, and I'll just point out a couple of items, and then if there are other questions that you might have. I will point out particularly some of the changes on the red line piece that you will see up there, but I know we've had a number of conversations about the piece that formally read training and responsibilities of teachers and administrative staff. I know there were some questions about our ability to meet the requirement or expectation in terms of looking at trying to train all staff over the course of a school year. So I know we talked about those things, so I didn't know if I'd like to start there or if there were particular questions.
That was my question.
Yes.
Could you repeat your question?
Okay,
Mr.
so
Gordon?
dealing with the suicide prevention, the update requires that all staff receive training in 2017, 2018. Should the date be in a regulation versus a policy, because right now it's in the policy. And if we are truly requiring all the staff training in 1 year, then do we want to have some additional parameters around it? So really, I was just trying to get an understanding of the impact. So in one sense, you had a date in the policy, which almost automatically makes the policy outdated.
Right.
The minute you put a date in there. And then just this concept of trying to train everybody in 1 year, in the way I was reading, is like it was going to be done over the summer, and I just couldn't figure out the logistics and the impact of it.
And if I may, my comment to that is that I don't think it's realistic that we can do 5,000 employees in 1 year. And what I want to recommend to the board is that we develop a schedule of training across the next couple of years or so to identify groups that we want to go first. The challenge in this policy is, as you know, as you adopt a calendar, we only have a certain number of professional development days included. Those days are already filled with a lot of other things, both mandated things as well as district instructional pieces. And so we're going to have to plan for this in a way that makes it happen. But even when the state puts in licensure requirements that go across the board for licensed personnel or all staff, it usually occurs upon a person's next licensure renewal. So we need to be able to sit down and map out a realistic schedule that would tap into as many employees as we can over the next several years. Again, not trying to push it out 10 years. It is a critical piece. And also create perhaps an awareness piece for all staff, that the policy has been adopted, what we know to be awareness around suicide, provided perhaps a FAQ. There are some groups out there that have a number of resources. I think some of those resources would tend to be more detrimental than beneficial if we use that as our resource. People get alarmed, people without a context. We want to look at some resources that allow us to talk about some awareness pieces as we move into a system of training people. We also have to identify who the trainers will be and what their schedules, but at this point, we don't have the capacity to be able to train all of our staff, because all of the staff, again, is close to 5,000 people. And to be able to do that in a way that is not just a drive-by opportunity, but give some thought. And then we also have to mirror that with other requirements that we have from the state as it relates to annual training and that piece, which we've already started with some of that annual training in the last couple of weeks with principals.
Yeah, and that for those that may not be aware, like, so the new law that McAuliffe just signed was anyone applying or renewing a license to be a school counselor, complete training to recognize the signs of mental health disorders. So that was one piece of it. But the other, there may be opportunities out there, as you mentioned, there are resources out there where trainings can be anywhere from, an awareness training, which could be an hour-long piece, to one that is several hours long. And if our goal is to have a comprehensive training, we could start phasing in, because I know there have been individuals with groups with like the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention who have trainings available that are tailored to, the needs of the audience. So is it possible, do you think, that we could have an awareness, like the 1 hour piece that could go out to, that could go out to all staff and then phase in a more
I think we can do awareness. We can certainly, I think we need to have a combination of opportunities for people, and they can self-select for the 1 hour piece if we can have it available. And then we also have written opportunities, or materials, resources for staff. Again, yes, we can, but when are we going to do it in this calendar? We are at our limit on this calendar for this year. And also, when some of these groups come in, they don't always all come in for free.
Right.
And so we haven't built in a resource to support this. So we've got to map it out from A to Z. But that's why I wanted to, like I said, be able to bring back to the board as part of a regulation how we will begin to implement this, but committing to a level of awareness at a minimum in this first year, and then moving into what's going on. Because if folks who are going through licensure renewal, then that would be redundant. We shouldn't require them to have to go through the MPS. If they can document that they've done that through the licensure renewal piece, then they can check that off, in the box. Often, too, when the state does certain things like this or provides things, they, too, will open up some. So we imagine some of the associations, the Elementary and Secondary Principals Association, the Counselors Association, any number of those folks may even find some awareness that we may recognize that some of the awareness and things are going on there. But like I said, in order to do this, we would be impacting instructional time at some point, because the number of days that we've agreed to for a calendar, which already includes additional to our full-time returning teachers are already contracted for 7 professional development days prior to the opening of school. And then there's the 1 day in October, there's a day, I think, at January, the semester, and then there's a little bit of time that we try to make available, and many teachers take advantage of it, between June and the end of close of school and the end of June. So when we start looking at what are some opportunities we can make this available, folks, they may look into it and take advantage of it, and we can certainly track and monitor who's there. The other piece is making sure we have some recertification points for the various groups associated with this. That makes it even more attractive. Okay, my license may be due soon, and I can include whatever my training, 5 points or 10 points or whatever it is, toward my recertification. When we do training like this for such as our classified and support staff, such as bus drivers and clerical staff in buildings, security officers and all of that, we can begin to think about how we build that into their professional development, either during this year or as part of their next summer's professional development. So we're asking for the opportunity and asking and recommending the opportunity to develop a plan for the training that would have for 17-18 school year an awareness component, make a commitment to sharing ongoing resources that come to us that people may want to access on their own, and then plan how we bring to the district training. This is huge when we talk about all staff.
So, well, to the committee and to the board, can I make the recommendation that we add this as part of a board training item this week? Because when we were in, so we can kind of go over again the policy committee review process, because the idea was that when the committee would bring a recommendation to the board, you all would have vetted that with the administration and come with a joint recommendation around something that works. If we get to this meeting and the committee is coming forward for recommendation and the superintendent administration is questioning the impact of the policy, then it really shouldn't have come out of committee yet. So, but I don't want there to be a delay, but I think I personally see a big gap between what's in the policy and what I'm hearing we can have the capacity and the fiscal ability to implement. So we can just kind of table it for a couple of days, and then maybe that'll get us an opportunity to talk through the process again and how things get worked through the committee, if the committee and the board is okay with that.
Mr. Jordan,
Yeah.
Was your question around the staff development on Roman numeral 3 of the suicide prevention, was it in the clean copy?
Yeah.
I don't have my Roman numerals in front of me, but it was really about fiscal impact and the capacity for the division to implement what the policy was saying.
In a year?
Well, that's what my understanding of the
What I read.
policy is what it said.
Yes.
It reads this year.
For
Right.
this year, yeah, 2017-18,
On the clean copy?
on the clean copy. It's on the
What page
first
number?
page, yeah, of the clean copy.
I have triennial.
No, it's two. So the first piece says that everybody would be trained in the first year. And then it says every 3 years, you would have to go through recertification. Is that correct?
Right.
As I was understanding it?
Yes, and I
Doesn't say
think we should take your suggestion to make sure we're on the same page, because I'm not sure that I agree that it sounds like we are not on the same page with the training piece of it, so.
Dr. Gabriel?
Let me ask this then, just in moving forward with this school year, our counselors, our guidance counselors do receive training as a part of their professional development on suicide prevention. So if there's a child in the building and a teacher doesn't know what to do with it, they can refer them to that guidance counselor.
Not only the guidance counselor, but we also have in our crisis teams, and Dr. Harold Lance can talk about our school psychologists and
Right.
visiting
School
teachers
psychologists,
are
yes.
also currently part of our core in support of any student who is discussing or showing signs of potential, some distress around suicide. And so we currently have an intervention and response process and team that's in place. This wouldn't stop that anyway. We have to have that. What I see as the policy is making sure more folks are aware of the signs and
Yes,
and what it needs to look like. And I think we have to spend some more time figuring out what's the appropriate way to have all staff trained and what's a reasonable way to have that accomplished.
Okay.
So, okay, great.
I was gonna say, if we can take the next couple of days, and because of the implications for the upcoming school year, and then try to come to an agreement on the policy, on that piece of it. And I'll let you go over if there are any questions on in other areas, but for
Well,
that
I'd just like
piece-
to,
Or maybe we'll just come back to it.
I mean, if somebody else has some questions, I didn't see anybody else submitting, but if anybody else have any other questions or concerns on the policy as it was currently before us? So hearing none, then those would be the things that we would take a look at, and then, let there be no mistake, I think this board is clearly committed to suicide prevention education.
Absolutely. And the
But we just-
administration is
Oh,
too.
yeah, I'm sorry. I meant-
Yeah, I know.
I'm sorry, I meant all of
Oh,
us.
yeah. Yeah.
But,
And then we can vote on it
But it-
August 2nd.
exactly, it's just how we get it there is the question.
Okay.
All right.
And then, so Dr. Lansden, BYOD was the only other one I had a question on, and that was just the way we use cell phone versus smartphone and new technologies, and just trying to make sure that, your answer might be we got it, which is fine with me.
Mr. Hartle
but-
is joining the conversation.
All right.
I'm here. Okay, so can you ask that question one more time?
So the original question, when I was reading the BYOD policy, and under this section, communication devices, and it's actually under regulation, I believe. But I just noticed we use smartphone in some policies, we use cell phone in other policies of student conduct. And so since that distinction was being made, I didn't know if what was being recommended in the BYOD policy required any alignment with the cell phone policy / student conduct, or you all got it all together, but it just caught my attention, that's all.
And I can go over that a little bit. The best way for me to explain that really the use of that verbiage within the BYOD policy is that smartphone technology really the distinction between a cell phone and a smartphone is what we refer to as that IEEE 802.11. And it gets very, very
Which I understand,
techy.
but the average citizen is my point.
Yeah, exactly. So when we discuss the IEEE 802.11, what we're talking about there is that standard communication of Wi-Fi technology. If you think back to a normal cell phone or a flip phone, that type of technology doesn't have that ability. You can't connect to a wireless network, you can't surf the internet. A cell phone is purely for data, or not data, text communication and voice communication. So when we refer to smartphone in the BYOD policy, that's why we make that distinction and we don't say cell phone, because a cell phone is not going to have any use in a classroom because it has to be on airplane mode anyways. The only thing you'll be able to do on it would be take a note.
So I
But
get
you're
that.
asking for the crosswalk between this and the Code of Student Conduct.
The crosswalk and how it gets communicated to the student and the parent, because if you, even though I have a smartphone, some people will say I have a cell phone. And so when we start talking about cell phone policies and what this rule and what that rule is, I just wanted to make sure that while our technical nomenclature means one thing, when the student or the parent or someone else talks about it, we still say cell phone and we mean smartphone, and we may say smartphone and we mean something else. And I just want to make sure that there was some connectivity and clarity there so that we wouldn't find people confused around the definition and the use of it or lack thereof in the environment based upon the policy.
Sure. And I am, Information Technology is working with Dr. Lands and Student Support Services in updating the student handbook and that code of conduct. So that is something that we can do, is basically define, just like we do in the BYOD policy by defining specific terms. That is something that we can easily add that defines a smartphone and defines a cell phone and the difference between them.
And then communicating it to the end user.
Yes.
Right. It would, as I say, part of this is the Code of Student Conduct, with student handbook, that includes the student code of conduct and the revisions that we're working to incorporate into that.
So that was it.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyone else, Ms. Basine?
I just had a couple of questions. We talk about the wireless, the filtering system and using MPS Connect, but I don't know if we want to be, my suggestion is to be specific about the fact that students not just should, but will use MPS Connect as their Wi-Fi connection versus using their regular cellular data plans, which doesn't necessarily filter the same way.
Yeah.
So they could have access, to different
and
things. And
that's going to be one of those nuances, if I'm correct, that it's going to be tough to discern which network they're on.
Yeah.
And
Yes, I mean, that will be a more of an administrative task. It is very hard to determine. You'd have to actually, look at a student's device to tell whether their Wi-Fi icon is on or not on a device. So it is something that requires a lot of digital citizenship. That this, it's something that we have to build upon, in our student populations.
So, and as I brought up in our policy committee meeting about, the digital safety and citizenship, if there will be a piece in the code of conduct that states that is what's expected, that they will be using the MPS Connect to connect to.
I agree with the question, and I agree with the backdrop of it. The challenge becomes, do we want to create a new battlefield, if you will, between teachers and with teachers and administrators, and the level of policing that has to go on to make sure which network someone is on. Because that would consume a lot of administrative time and a lot of instructional time. We need them to be there, but I don't know if anyone has resolved, unless when you do a BYOD, then we have to trust that people are gonna follow the rules. If we provide a one-to-one, then we can control the network. And it's a monumental task for us to control the network if we aren't providing the device.
We can't block it. We can't block access to the other networks other than NPS Connect.
We couldn't block it for a personal device, because we don't have any control over their device, aside from the websites that they access while they're on our network. The one thing I can say is that while the policy opens up the doors to allow students to utilize their devices, it still requires a procedure per school. It's something that the building administrator or the program administrator needs to drive. They're the ones that are going to be dictating exactly where and when devices can be used. A lot of school districts use stoplight systems to say green, it's acceptable to use at this current time, yellow, devices on the table, red, devices away. Red zones, green zones, that kind of concept. It's something that the building principal, along with student support services and my department, would have to work out and really build kind of a framework in order to incorporate it within a school building. The policy itself allows for us to begin that work.
The other piece that's important with what Mr. Hartle is saying, not only does it have to be driven by each school, but we have to have, as he said, some parameters of consistency, because this would be a huge communications nightmare. You know what happens. Well, in this school, they're allowing them to do X, but in this school, Y. So what are the things that are allowed, and what are the things that aren't allowed anywhere? And how then the red light, red, yellow, green light piece of what are the classes we use, if you don't use it during lunch, whatever else. And it's just us, it's the challenge between technology and the level of safety, digital awareness that we have to put in place. And Dr. Rogers, this is a big part of his background.
Ms. Goshen is not here, but we had these very conversations at the onset of the discussion about BYOD. What we don't want to do is to minimize the possibilities of having the capability of having students use our internal internet service. What I can share with you, having children of my own and as well as being involved in the BYOD process a couple of times, is that when you are going over rules and responsibilities and the AUP in the beginning of the school year, you explicitly say the expectation is that you use the internal network. And what you find is more often than not, students will want to join the guest network anyway because the service will be faster. In some instances, for example, we had training at Granby High School where it's sometimes difficult to get a signal, and I'd forgotten that we had a guest network until, actually I was in your session today, G.
Yeah.
And I jumped right on my phone and was able to navigate the internet pretty quickly, which keeps us compliant with what we want to happen. So I think it's not only educating the students, but educating the adults as well in the beginning of the school year, so when you're using it. So that's my 2 cents, and I think Ms. Goshen can probably speak more to the training that we're preparing to share with schools when they roll this out.
Okay. Anything else on the BYOD? Get a list of schools that you can connect, because I haven't found them yet. So, not to your network.
Oh.
I'm saying on private network. Anything else on policy? Policy review committee work. So we know we're going to table the suicide piece, and we'll come back once we get out of closed session and address the other policies that we have. Okay. So let's go to closed session. Ms. Doyle?
Do we want to do the committees?
No, I want to come back because I think that a couple of members may have to leave, and I want to make sure we can get to the closed session piece.
Okay.
And for right now, let's just, whatever the committee assignments are, let's just keep them, stay there for now
Okay.
until we get a chance to get to them. So I want to bring this phase of the open work session to a close and entertain a motion for us to enter into closed session.
I move that we enter into closed session.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved by Ms. Doyle and seconded by Dr. Gabriel. Ms. Banks?
Thank you. It's been moved that the school board, superintendent, and council go into a closed session for the purposes which are set out in subsection A of section 2.2-3711 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as amended for the discussion or consideration of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific officers, appointees, or employees of the Norfolk Public Schools, including consideration of the personnel docket of this date. Ms. Basine?
Aye.
Ms. Doyle?
Aye.
Dr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Reverend Haywood?
Aye.
Dr. Robinson?
Aye.
Ms. Wagner?
Aye.
Mr. Jordan?
Aye. So, Dr. Gorman expecting us to move to the conference room?
Yes.
Okay. So let's reconvene in the conference room in 5 minutes, and we can get going with the closed session.